Making your own game art can be extremely difficult, like downright painful, especially if you've never done it before, which is why so many indie developers have gone with pixel art, because it's so much easier to get started with than any of the other art forms, and it's far easier to get proficient with it than any of the other art forms. That is not to say that it is an easy art form, because all art is a struggle. Forever. Always. Not to worry, in this video I'm going to be sharing an entire pixel art framework broken down into 10 tips, starting with the technicalities and ending with tips that you've never heard before. But first, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Alvin. I'm going to be telling you how to become a pixel art master. I'm also not a pixel art master. I'm sorry if that's disappointing. However, a lot of the tips that I'm going to be sharing in this video are going to be shared in a way that I wish that they were presented to me. And when we go past the technicalities, I'm just going to go into tips that I was just never told before. Especially ones about how to find enjoyment with pixel art, because let's face it, most of us do not want to torture ourselves for hours on end at the mouse and keyboard. And by the way, in my defense, the actor that played Mr. Miyagi knew zero karate, so there are no rules. So, before we really dive deep into this, why do you even want to learn how to do pixel art in the first place? So, number one, if you're watching my videos, you're probably very indie like me. You're either doing this as a hobby, again, like me, or you're doing this with the hopes of becoming an independent developer at some point, aka an indie developer. In which case, you need to be practical. Pixel art is super practical. It's easy to pick up, and it masks a lot of the not arty abilities of a person. Because it's so low resolution, it covers up some of the bad art, especially bad animations. And it's actually way easier to make snappy, good animations because it's more frame by frame and you have a lot more control over what's going on. As a bonus to this, games are more about gameplay than they are about the best graphics. So if you have a really great game that has great gameplay, your average person that doesn't like pixel art might end up still loving that game because they're like, the graphics kind of suck, but the game's amazing. And which means that it keeps you focused on the thing that's actually important for your game, which is the gameplay. So let's get into software. Pixel art is just filling in a graph. So you would think that you could just do that with anything, and you can. That's the wonderful thing about pixel art. But if you're trying to get to the point where you can actually create game-worthy pixel art, then you're going to want to learn the best tool for the job. However, picking software is a video within itself, but the outcome of the video is almost always the same. Basically, Aseprite is the best overall tool out there. It has a disgustingly good timeline that combines frames and layers, making it an ideal tool for animations. A great alternative to it is Pixel Edit, which uses an intuitive tile system, making it ideal for creating tile sets. Using Aseprite for animations and Pixel Edit for tile sets is the best workflow that I've personally used. Aseprite is about $15, while Pixel Edit is $9, so even combined they are less than $25. However, not everyone can afford both, so Aseprite is my overall pick. If you can't afford either of them, then my favorite free software is Piskel App. Tying this back into the framework discussion that we've had at the beginning of this video, you could argue that becoming a pixel art master is just the art of mastering your pixel art software. So choosing your pixel art software is almost like 50% in the battle. So even though that was just a singular tip, it's by far the biggest one, and it's why it took so long inside of this video. From here, we'll go into the couple basic skills that you need to utilize any pixel art software. And then from there, we'll go into the path of mastery, what tutorials to use, where to find the different tutorials and color palettes. And finally, we'll finish off with the mindset required for mastery. Actually talk about the technical skills required. Basically, you just need to be able to create shapes and color them in, right? So for the creating of the shapes portion of this, let's talk about how to create an outline and the general rule of thumb. In the low resolution world of pixel art, there are different rules for creating shapes. I have two main ones that I follow. To showcase these rules, we'll jump into Aseprite and create a head from the top-down perspective similar to Zelda. So we end up with something like this. As you can see, the outline is really messy and the shape makes no sense at all. However, when we first lay down a shape, this kind of result is not uncommon. In order to clean up a bit, we should talk about the pixels and outline having personal space issues. In other words, they only like it when 2 other pixels touch them. Much more than that, and they get overwhelmed. Every pixel has 8 slots for pixels touching them. A pixel that is part of the outline can have 2 other outline pixels touching it. So the pixels in red here should not be used as part of the outline. You can break this rule to create specific looks, but it is best to start off by following the rule, then breaking it where things don't look right. Taking that Zelda head, let's give some color to the hair so that this makes more sense. I'm going to make all of the pixels that are touching too many others red. Now let's remove all the red, and as you can see, it's a much cleaner image. My second rule is concerning the pattern of pixels. Generally speaking, gradual is better. Over here, there is 1 pixel followed by 2 horizontal, then back down to 1, then to 3 horizontal. The problem there is that the 2 horizontal pixels breaks the pattern between the 2 sets of 1s. The brain digests that information and makes it so our character has a cone head. In other words, we need to maintain the pattern. To maintain it, let's take into account the side of the head, which is just a vertical line, and realize that we're trying to utilize a pattern to move us towards a horizontal line from the top of the head. So we follow up the vertical line that forms the side of the head with a shorter vertical line. We'll then utilize a single pixel to transition us over to horizontal lines. Then we'll use a 2 pixel line, then another, then we will fill in the rest of the top. In other words, we work gradual. Now gradual works for round shapes and drastic changes works for corners. From there, all you need to do is reproportion everything until you end up with something like this, and that's 99% of everything you will need to do to create shapes with pixel art. Color theory is an infinitely deep well of opinions that you can gain. There is a lot to color theory that is beyond the scope of this video. However, the biggest thing to learn when you are starting out in pixel art is hue shifting. Hue shifting is the changing of color when you are either shading or highlighting. The reason we do this is because our brains associate light with sunlight. In other words, it thinks it is yellow. And it's right. The implications of this is that when you are shading, you don't just add some black to darken up the color, you shift the color away from yellow towards blue. When you are highlighting, you don't just add white, you shift the color away from blue towards yellow. Let's go back to the earlier Zelda-ish example. First, let's make a shadow under the hairline. Moving away from yellow towards blue, we end up at this reddish color. This color already looks like a shadow compared to the normal skin tone. Saturating it a little more and darkening it up completes the effect, and we have a nice shadow under the hairline. For a highlight, we can take the hair color, move it away from blue and towards yellow, ending at this light blue color. Desaturate the color and move it towards white, and we have a highlight. Honestly, mastering color theory right off the bat is a big ask. That's why I brought it up at this point, because although this is a useful technical skill, it is more important to just have it in your mind than it is to master it. Because a lot of people create color palettes that are free to use out there, and using those palettes will teach you a lot more about color theory than any article. But to get the full benefit, you have to understand hue shifting first. And that's it for making shapes and choosing colors. In other words, we finished the basics. The next few tips are all about building on that foundation with different resources out there. Starting with number 4, Lowspec is the home of color palettes. By Googling Lowspec, you'll end up at this website. Click on color palettes and this screen will pop up. Then you'll be able to scroll through and see different palettes. I recommend looking through them and finding a sample image that fits within your art style. I like this one as an example. It's not your usual bright color palette for retro style games, which is so stereotypical nowadays. The blood in there combined with the desaturated dark colors creates a somber atmosphere. Just like in real life where cloudy days can impact our moods, a desaturated dark day for an entire video game can really change the tone of the entire experience. A bright color palette reminds us of those bright games from our childhood and can speak about sunshine and adventures, but a dark palette speaks about hiding away and discomfort. It reminds us that we need to stay inside and seek shelter. Or you're like me and the sunshine makes you want to hide too. Regardless of our preferences, we react emotionally to saturated colors with thoughts of sunshine, fun, and joy, while we react to desaturation and darkness with thoughts of somber, horror, and surrealness. Similar to unicorn flatulence, the right color palette can bring beauty to the grotesque. So choose your color palette carefully and really enjoy the experimentation as you're getting a feel for the colors. Remember the hue shifting when you are using the palette so that you can get the most out of the learning experience, and most of all, have fun. So now that we talked about trying to create the outlines and then trying to fill it in with color, so basically use that color palette along with the outlines while keeping hue shifting in mind, let's talk about references. And so whenever you're trying to do something, just look up Miniboss's pixel art tutorials. He has tons of them up there. He believes in free tutorials. They're amazing, guys. This is one of those guys that you should support on Patreon. He's so good. The thing I like the most about his tutorials is how concise / condensed they are. Because the artwork functions as an example to the teachings on each image, they work perfectly as references while also giving instructions. Each one has a subject that you can learn off of. Your sword swings don't look like they can kill a goblin? Miniboss can help with that. Your pixelated characters believe in the Second Amendment? Miniboss can help with that. Need your bird-headed camel donkey to be able to walk with them 4 legs? Yes, Miniboss can help. The point is that every artist uses references, and if you need your reference to also be tutorials, aka you're not an expert pixel artist, aka you're you and I, then I highly recommend using Miniboss. Number 6 is the video tutorial channel that I recommend using. However, I do want to talk about video tutorials first. I recommend using them sparingly, and only when you are trying to create something specific. I've heard of many an aspiring pixel artist getting stuck in a tutorial loop, never creating their own art. In other words, the ideal goal is to create art with the help of references, which is why I brought up Miniboss first, because he is a great compromise between tutorials and references. However, if those are just not cutting it and you learn better with some videos, like this guy named Pixel Pete, especially when you're first beginning, he has a lot of cool little tutorials, like what he talks about for how to deal with water is what I thought was pretty cool. He also talks about grass and making tile sets. I don't know, he does some pretty cool things. So I have enjoyed his tutorials and I watch them sometimes when I'm just chilling. And that is it for resources to enhance your pixel skills. From here on out, let's go into the mindset required for mastery. The basic principle that I believe in following for pretty much all of game design is simple to complex. I believe that you need to start simple, go complex, and this includes when you're building up your skill set as a pixel artist. If you start with something like this Link right here, very flat, no shading, not that many pixels inside of him, very standard, and start animating something like this, that skill set of animating this will translate to animating this, and even to animating this monstrosity. However, the higher resolution you go, the more difficult animating becomes. Not only because it takes more time to place that many pixels, but because the imagination stops filling in the gaps for you. Simple sprites like these look amazing despite the simple animations. These are 2 to 4 frame animations, with one of the frames turning the sprite white. Trying to pull off a similar level of polish on a higher resolution image requires upwards of 4 times the number of frames. However, starting simple then inching towards complex doesn't just apply to choosing your resolution. It means creating the silhouette, then working towards getting the outline right, then filling in the image with color. It's that step-by-step process. It means getting the bare minimum art for your game made, then trying out the gameplay with just a few keyframes before fully animating all of your images, which when that is applied brings me to number 8. Focus on gameplay first. Too many people spend hours making amazing art that never becomes part of their game. As indie developers, we just don't have that much time to waste. Therefore, focusing on gameplay first is key. I'm going to make an entire tutorial on a pixel art workflow for Unity so that I can demonstrate what I mean. However, a summarized version of it is to make simple one-frame animations that represent the states of the character: idle, run, attack, hurt, death, etc. In other words, just the keyframe poses. Then build gameplay around those one-frame animations. Get the game to feel the way you want it without drawing too many images. Don't even finalize these initial images. You need the bare minimum to represent what is going on in the game according to what your brain will understand. With those images, you can get the gameplay to feel right, and then finalize the art to enhance that feeling. Everything inside of a game is meant to enhance gameplay. The gameplay is what makes a game a game. If it doesn't enhance the gameplay, then it needs to get cut. Too many people create a run animation that looks like this before even building up the gameplay. However, that run animation, although good, might not be the best one for your game, and it might have been wasted work. Creating finalized artwork before you get done prototyping is like proposing on a first date. It's premature, and it has a high chance to end with emotional trauma. Please don't do it. Moving on, a successful mindset isn't limited to the concept of simple to complex. It requires motivation and passion, which brings us to number 9. Find the fun. There is a lot of confusion out there about people wanting to create something they like to consume. Just because you like getting a massage doesn't mean that you want to touch somebody else's Chewbacca back. The same thing can be said for becoming a pixel artist. Just because you love the looks of the animations in Hyper Light Drifter doesn't mean you'll like the process of making those animations. Creating tile sets is intricate and detailed, like putting together a puzzle, while making animations requires timelines and actually feeling the game feel within you to express it. The mindsets are so different that the work feels like different jobs, especially when you are first getting started. Trying to tackle all these different styles is a mistake that I made when I first got started. So I recommend trying everything from animations and tile sets to user interfaces and backgrounds, and then through trial and error, find which one is the most enjoyable, then focus on that. As you get good at that particular skill, you'll find that many of the sub-skills transfer. Mastery of the art software and color theory are examples. You'll also find that getting good makes everything more enjoyable. For instance, I did not like creating user interfaces at first. I found it tedious. But when I needed to find ways for my user interface to work with the rest of my palette and art style, it went from tedious work to art and became so enjoyable. Finding how to have fun with this is so important because you'll have an overwhelming amount of artwork to do for your game. So completing the bare minimum prototype art first and practicing what is most enjoyable will really help boost your motivation and take pixel art from a necessary skill to learn to a beloved pastime for you to master. Working towards mastery in any art form touches upon something sacred within us, which brings me to number 10, the inexplicable. Or, as I like to sometimes call it, the human element that we all share. But what do I mean by that? After all, there's a lot of things that we all share. I believe it was Dane Cook that said, "We all lie, we all cry, and we all take painful dumps." There's also a humanity-wide shared love of McDonald's, which is probably tied into at least one of those things. I also like Taco Bell. Unrelated, but I thought I'd share. Going beyond that, there's something that crosses language barriers about a good anime. Mona Lisa's smile is universally perplexing, and I've seen Korean dramas make grown men cry. The point is, there is something shared within us that some art forms have been able to express, and it goes beyond language, borders, distances, and words. We might be able to describe it in a one-word feeling like yearning or perseverance, but doesn't truly capture the full humanness of it. And by humanness, I don't just mean the quality that makes us humans, but the trait of art that captures the beautiful side of humanity. It's the redeeming quality of us all, and it's the purpose of art. Every video game we make, every movie we produce, every novel that is written, every painting that is brushed, every human that exists wants to taste that inexplicable trait that transcends humanity and redeems us from being animals into something indistinguishable, yet undeniable. Capturing it is the purpose of what we do, whether it is pixel art or making a video game or any other form of creation that we aim for mastery with. To become a master is to express it. It is why experiencing art is not a waste of time, and it is the most fulfilling thing you can touch upon as you create it. It's too abstract to be described, yet too real not to try to grasp it. It's the goal of all art. Tying this all together, pixel art is just using a piece of software to fill in a grid. It's probably a really big, drastic change from hearing me talk about art, but all the same, it is true. You can artistically do it, but it's best not to overcomplicate it in your head as you're starting out. When you're starting, I recommend a combination of Aseprite and Pixel Edit, mastering Aseprite first, then Pixel Edit. Figure out what you want to try first, and then pull up the appropriate mini-boss tutorial. Start as simple as possible, then polish until you created what you wanted, and have fun with it all. But beyond all that, try to find the one word that describes what you are trying to capture with your art. An example would be joy. Create a rough version of it at first, then make your gameplay, your art, your music, your sound effects all expand upon it until it becomes inexplicable. So when someone plays your game, they'll feel love, even if they can't explain why. Thanks so much for being here with me for all of this time. It really means a lot to me. Please like, subscribe, and most of all, I love to talk with you all. So a comment down below will mean the world to me. Have a great day.